Hi, I'm Angela Walters from Quilting is My Therapy, and in this tutorial, we're putting a modern twist on a classic hand quilting design. I'm talking about clamshells, of course. This design has been around for a long time, but just because it has traditional roots doesn't mean that we can't put a little modern twist on it to use it to add interest and a whimsical touch to our quilts. In this tutorial, I'll show you how to quilt it, some fun variations, and then be sure to stick around to the end because I'll have some quilty eye candy in which you'll see how to use these on actual quilts. But before we start, let's get rid of the idea that these clamshells have to be all the exact same size and shape. Let's embrace the wonkiness that comes with free-handing clamshell designs. Now, if me saying that just gave you a little bit of a hive feeling, don't worry, I have a compromise. Instead of marking out each of the clamshells, let's just mark a registration line to make them all the same height. That way, even if they're not the same exact size, the fact that they're all similar in height will help give us the illusion of perfection. If this still seems like too much freehanding for you, don't worry, at the end of the video, I'll show you how to use rulers to get those nice, perfect-ish, symmetrical clamshells. Starting from one corner of your block, quilt a row of arcs along the edge, ending on the other side. It doesn't matter what size you make those clamshells, just try to make them as consistent as possible. And there I have my first row. I just happened to finish on a half clamshell, but it would still work if I ended on a full one. So that's kind of what I'm aiming for, either ending on a full or a half clamshell. This is the perfect time to add more detail to that row if you want, and I'm going to show you how to do that later. But first, let's go ahead and move on to the second row. What we want to do is quilt those second row of arcs just the same, except we want them slightly offset. That means that they're going to land in the middle of the arc below it. Since I've already landed on the halfway point of my clamshell, I don't need to travel along the edge. But if this had been a full clamshell, I would have had to travel up along the side and then quilt down to my next spot. In the description box below, you'll find a link to quilting diagrams that will show you how to quilt the next row of arcs, whether you end on a full arc or a half arc. So be sure to go down there and check them out because they took forever to make. All right, so we're going to do the next row. So I'm going to quilt my clamshell up, and I'm aiming for the middle point of the clamshell below. So what I'm doing is as I'm quilting, I'm putting my eye right where I want it to end, quilting up along, and then trying to end somewhat close until I get to the other side. Now, even if these don't perfectly hit the middle, it's fine, and even if they're not perfectly smooth, it's okay as well. Once we fill in this whole block, you're not going to notice any of those imperfections. And here I have my second row of clamshells, and this one ended on a half one as well. Before I move on to the third row, I think I'm going to add a little bit more quilting to this row. Maybe I'll do just a little echoing with a teardrop in between. Echoing around, coming down, adding just a little teardrop, and then continuing on. And since I'm not really loving my first clamshell, I think it's a little wonky, I'm going to add some more echoing until I'm happy with the way it looks. I think that's enough embellishing on this row. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, and since I'm already towards the middle of a clamshell, I don't need to travel or anything. I'm just going to go right into my next clamshell. The only difference is I'm not going to aim exactly for the middle. I'm going to aim just short of the center of that previous one. No, it's not because I made a mistake, although that is a plausible explanation. No, I'm going to show you a different variation of a clamshell. Because what I want to do is in between these clamshells, let's just add a little zigzag or a little back and forth line. So arcing up, landing just a little short, and a zigzag line. These back and forth lines add just a little texture, which is great for landscape quilts, or when you want a different texture to your quilting, or when you accidentally land in the wrong place. Now it's obviously easy to get into the groove of quilting these clamshells, so I'm going to go ahead and quilt another row. Now you can quilt this design where you're either moving the fabric horizontally or vertically, and up to this point I've been demonstrating it horizontally, and now I'm going to quilt it vertically, which I usually have an easier time with, but everything is still going to be the same. I'm still going to quilt my arc, go down to my midpoint, reposition my hands, and then continue on. And then, because I'm having so much fun, I'm going to go ahead and embellish this row by adding some arcs or some echoes. And I might echo it again and then add another little teardrop or even a little pointy leaf shape. Okay, so I'm almost towards the top of my row, and I'm sure I can almost hear you asking, how do you handle it if you get to the top of your block and there's not enough room for another row of clamshells? Well, let me show you how to handle that. I think I'm going to go ahead and add echoing, fill in that space so we can see what this looks like. And there I have my block full of clamshells. Are they perfect? No, but they're fun, they're wonky, they're whimsical, and I think they're definitely quilt worthy. Now what's great about this design is, let's say you've quilted these arcs and you don't love them. You're thinking, oh my gosh, this is not how I meant for it to turn out. What I'm going to do is add some more quilting by quilting another row of arcs upside down to create orange peels. And that's going to help hide any mistakes, or let's just say quilting that is more ish than perfect. Okay. If the thought of having wonky clamshells make you really nervous, let's talk about using rulers. There are a lot of clamshell rulers out there, but my favorite is the multi-clamshell, which does clamshells in different sizes, which makes it incredibly versatile. I like to use the smaller clamshells for borders or sashings, and the larger ones for orange peels or an all-over design. But whether you use a machine quilting ruler or not, there are so many fun ways that you can use clamshells on your quilts. This is the time of the tutorial where I try to inspire you with actual quilts that have used this design. Now remember, this is meant to be inspiring, not intimidating. It's really just my persuasive argument to make you love this design as much as I do. And speaking of loving designs, who doesn't love baby clamshells inside of a larger clamshell? In this quilt called Glam Clam, designed by Latifa Safir, I added bits of smaller clamshells in random block to add a pop of detail. If you find that you're not completely comfortable with quilting clamshells, especially over a large area, starting out in a narrow strip or in a border will really help you feel more comfortable. Tula Pink designed and pieced this quilt pattern called Kiss Kiss, and I had so much fun quilting large clamshells in the striped blocks. Alternating the direction of the clamshells allows them to frame the center block, which is the most important part of the quilt. But what is so completely fun about the clamshells design is when you combine it with other quilting designs. That different texture just kind of pops and adds such a great look to those areas of your quilt. On this quilt, Shattered Frames, a free pattern which I designed for the Midnight Quilt Show, I wanted the quilting in the center to be the focus. Using Glide, a poly thread with a bit of sheen, I combined several designs, including swirls, pebbles, and, you guessed it, clamshells. To watch this episode of the Midnight Quilt Show or to get the free pattern, check out the description box below. I could spend all day showing you how fun it is to use clamshells on different quilts, but then you wouldn't have any time for quilting. So go try this design out on your quilt and then come back and let me know what kind of quilts you'd love to use clamshells on. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to take this basic concept of clamshells but make stacked squares. So I'll see you then.